Hello and welcome to the DME podcast, brought to you by DME, the podcast booking platform. Whether you're a podcaster or an aspiring guest, the DME app is a perfect platform for you to get booked and manage your podcast bookings. I'm your host, Sukh Hayre, the founder of DME, and on this podcast we'll be discussing the latest news and views in tech, the ins and outs of entrepreneurship, and even dipping our toes into the adrenaline-filled world of mixed martial arts. Today, I'm joined by Rahul Verma, a political scientist and fellow at the Centre for Policy Research. We begin with the recent student protests and the examination paper leaks that helped trigger them. But as Rahul explains, the demonstrations also reveal something much deeper: a growing frustration among young Indians about employment, social mobility, and whether the economy can deliver on the promises of education. We also discuss India's political resilience, its long-term economic challenges, and whether the country can fulfill its ambitions as a major global power. It's a thoughtful and balanced conversation, so please enjoy Rahul Verma. Rahul Verma, welcome to the DME podcast.
Thank you, Sukh, for having me.
Well, thank you for joining, Rahul. I'm sorry we don't have much of a background or acquaintances, but I was looking to speak to an India expert for a while, or someone who's very close to the Indian current affairs situation. And I kind of found you online through a little bit of research, and you're very accommodating with your time, so I appreciate you joining the podcast. But for our listeners who may not know you or know about some of the work that you do, could you explain a little bit about your own background and some of your work at the CPR in India?
Yeah, so I'm a political scientist by training. I completed my PhD a few years ago at University of California, Berkeley. I'm a fellow at Center for Policy Research, which is a think tank based in New Delhi. My work is largely on elections and voting behavior. I study public opinion polling. I write columns on current political events in India. I have a co-authored book, which is on ideological conflicts in Indian politics. I also teach political science to undergraduate students.
Awesome. So lots of strings to your bow. So I think I've chosen the right guest when it comes to Indian current affairs and politics then. So the main reason I want you on, there's a story that has been bubbling away for the last couple of weeks in India, but that hasn't really been covered in the UK at least. I've not seen very much coverage of it. But from what I understand, there's been a large student protests ongoing kind of throughout the country. Could you just give myself and maybe our audience a little bit of background into what those protests were about, what was the cause, and what was the actual underlying issues behind that, please?
Okay, so let's start chronologically. I think around mid-May, during a Supreme Court hearing on unemployment and certain other things, Chief Justice of India made an oral remark that, there are young unemployed youth who are like cockroaches. Of course, he clarified this, that he was misquoted and it was taken out of context. But what happened the next day, that a young person whose name is Abhijit Dipke, he lives or works in Boston, basically started an Instagram or something on social media, I think an Instagram handle, which is known as Cockroach Janta Party. And within 2 or 3 days, this handle basically saw more than 2 million subscribers, right? So overnight, it became a viral and sensation. And then Abhijit Dipke and a couple of others, sort of like people who were in some ways the core movers of this handle, they basically decided that they are going to basically protest against some of the government policies, especially the failure of the government to be able to conduct examinations for institutions of higher education and recruitment exams. So government of India and many state government, and it happens globally, they conduct exams. And there has been issue of leakage of paper, meaning that, the question paper got out before the exam even started. And so many people either had bought, there is all like a scam and a nexus. And so the exam had to be cancelled. And this exam was for admission to medical colleges across India. And so these guys actually decided that they will basically they demanded the resignation of education minister to begin with, and that some of them are going to basically sit in protest. Uh, Later on, they were joined by a well-known public activist, Sonam Wangchuk, who basically sat on an indefinite hunger strike at the protest site. And the group had basically declared that on July 20th, when the monsoon session of Indian Parliament will begin, they will take out a march from the protest site to the Parliament if their demands are not met. And so till 20th July, which was Monday, this sort of like movement, like most people or commentators had written, this movement only seems good on social media. It does not seem to have mobilizing power. And so you will see just like, 100, people on the protest site, and that's it. But on July 20th, or the night of basically 19th, you saw a mass outpouring of young students from perhaps first in and around national capital region, but there were people who also came from far-flung areas from different states. And so you had a large gathering of people on July 20th in Delhi. So this is the chronological event. Of course, in between, I think the turning point was because Sonam Wangchuk's fast, I think, had entered either 18th or 19th day, and his health condition had started deteriorating. So, like the court had made some observations regarding his health. Police intervened and they picked him from the protest site to take him to the hospital, and so those created some imageries for protesters to be able to get sympathy and mobilize.
Okay. So, judging from the outside, a few leaked exam papers doesn't seem as a great enough cause to mobilize hundreds of thousands of people on the streets. So, was that the actual root cause of what the motivations behind the protest, or were there other underlying concerns?
No, this was an immediate provocation. I don't want to say that this was the sole reason, but
Yeah.
what has happened in last few years, that this was not like the paper leakage of medical exam was not the only case. In last few years, I think dozens of such cases have happened both at the central level and in many states. So in some ways, it has built some frustrations regarding the examination system. But also, I think there is a broad underlying economic anxiety, so to say, among young people. See, in a country like India, where education is like perhaps the most credible source of economic mobility, right? And if the state and in some ways modern state promises to its citizens that there is going to be a fair reward for hard work that you do, in some ways, like if all of those things collapse, right, or you see it crumbling, then there is going to be frustration and anger. So I think all of this combined with immediate provocation of the examination paper leakage, and then the chief justice calling unemployed youth as cockroaches, I think all of this just added up to things. Yeah.
So, was there any suggestion that maybe the leaks were kind of nepotistic in their origins? And I know India historically has a very class-based society. Well, I think most countries do, to be fair. But they make a lot of Indians. Was it a suggestion from the movement or from the student process that it was the exam leaks were favouring a particular social strata?
See, I don't think we know like who was getting sort of like advantage of this kind of examination leakages. But by and large, what has happened in last few years, not last few years, last few decades, is that there is kind of a nexus that has developed between, I would say, coaching centers. So you would say that like in every sort of like major city of India, you will see a small economy around these coaching centers where students go and prepare for these examinations, right? And so these competitive exams have become a very, very high stake game. And so there is, I think, a nexus that involves these coaching center players, perhaps some members who are in politics and in bureaucracy. And so this has become a recurring phenomena. Of course, in some ways, think about it like education, like these coaching institutions have a very high fee. And in a developing economy like India, only people from middle classes or upwards can afford a fee of some of these places. And when these papers are getting leaked, there are allegations that uh, like people bought these papers for 25 lakh, 30 lakh, or 50 lakh Indian rupees. This would be sort of like, a large sum of money. And then entrance examination, like entrance fee for sitting for those exams, is also costly. Sometimes you get your examination centers outside the city, so people have to travel. So there is a lot more cost for poor people if these exams get cancelled and then they basically are postponed or redone, compared to sort of like middle classes or upper middle classes, right? So there is a economic cost.
Yeah, so there's probably an underlying social inequality
Yes.
narrative that is probably there. But to be fair, I think certainly in the UK, there's something very similar when it comes to tuition and private tuition versus state education and selective schooling. So I have a lot of experience of that, and it's that's not unique to India or any stretch of the imagination. Just to kind of pivot a little bit, then, so obviously you said that the movement or the latest student protests were very much or viewed as a social media enterprise. How big a role did social? Well, I think you stated that it did play a huge role in actually gaining momentum. But I think India has, I think all governments have, to be fair, a wanting habit to kind of restrict social media use for their populace. I'm just thinking back to the farmers' protest a number of years ago, I think during the COVID times, or maybe just after. I remember hearing stories that the social media bans in place. I think that there's certainly
it does happen, but it largely, like, you won't see a countrywide ban or a statewide ban on social media usage, right? Like, those shutdowns are normally located at the epicenter of where the protest is taking place. The government's own logic is to basically able to create or like have a control over law and order situation. So my own position here is government is not fully wrong in sort of like doing that, but of course sometimes it is also to curb freedom of speech and kind of conversations that can take place between protesters. But by and large, even on July 20th, I don't think there was internet shutdown beyond 5 kilometer radius of the protest site.
Okay. And has so I understand that the education minister has resigned in the last few days. So has that quelled the protests? Is that have the protests achieved their aim?
Well, that was their main demand. See, there were three demands that they made. The first one was basically non-negotiable resignation of the education minister. The second demand that they made was a lot of students had committed suicide, and some of them committed suicide because of, like, the frustrations with these leakages and re-examinations and maybe the cost and other kind of things. So they asked for compensation for families where such tragic things had happened. And the third demand was that no legal or police action should be taken on students who participated in these protests. I think in some ways that was the real demand, because real demand, especially the education, resignation of education minister. And the reason people made a big deal out of it, because in last 12 years since Prime Minister Modi took power, we have not seen resignation of a minister in this kind of like protest or public pressure. There was another case when Me Too had happened. There was a member, like a Rajya Sabha member, who was also a minister. I think he was uh, State Minister for External Affairs, Mr. M.J. Akbar, former journalist. He was accused of sexual harassment by several journalists, and he had to resign. So I
Okay.
think this was one of the biggest hurdles. So a lot of people thought that even if government is going to concede on other things, they are not going to buckle under pressure on the ministerial resignation. But perhaps the government, in its wisdom, decided to cut losses, especially because the movement was growing and they didn't want it to grow in other cities and districts, and then, creating more a political challenge for the government.
Understood. Okay, so just pivoting a little bit to kind of India's wider economy and kind of that younger generation at the moment. So I think it's often been a lot of the reading that I have, or a lot of the commentary I see, is around India's youth population has been a great economic advantage because they're highly educated, generally speak English in the main. Is that still an advantage if one of the complaints is that they don't have the jobs to transition into once they complete their education?
This is a very hard question, and it depends how you want to think about it. So in some ways, think about it. Yeah, we will continue to see a large number of Indians getting technical jobs outside India, right? Be it in UK, maybe if visa issues are not going to be there in US and Australia and everywhere. And the reason, they are able to get those jobs, first it has to do something to those countries, but also because some of Indian graduate students, like they are entering into IIT exam, like clearing IITs. These are one of the most toughest exams, just because of the sheer number of people who are writing these exams, right? And so, like those 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 people, students or engineering graduates every year who get best of the jobs everywhere are basically competing with like 5 lakh or 10 lakh engineering students, right? So you're just thinking about the cream of the society and they are getting jobs. But so I don't know whether to call that as a demographic dividend, right? The problem is that we have a large number of graduate students who are not able to find jobs in India. And think what has happened in India. In last 30 to 40 years, the number of graduates across all disciplines have basically multiplied by at least 6 to 8 times. In 1983, we had some like 5 million graduates. In 2023, we had 63 million graduates, right? And so that's a 12-time multiple. The economy is not growing at the rate that we are producing graduates, right? So the economy is not able to absorb them. The second problem here is that the rate of unemployment is highest among the graduates in India. And like they're not able to, like even a large number of them who are working are basically in jobs which they are not happy about, right? And so in some ways, I think from the employment perspective, and with this kind of large number of graduates, and if you talk to industry experts, their complaint is going to be that most of these graduates are actually not employable. They don't have the kind of skills or the knowledge sets that we are looking for. The other side of the problem is that like India's sort of like industries and is basically not investing in training of these graduates to become part of their workforce. Like our R&D investments by Indian industries are very, very low by global standards. And so it's much more sort of like complex problem than like thinking in terms of demographic dividend and demographic disaster.
Yeah.
But bottom line here is that we are facing a challenge that no other country has faced on this planet.
Very
Right?
true.
Like the
Well,
scale of the challenge.
yeah,
Think about the scale of the challenge, right? Like 63 million uh, people are graduates in this country. That would be the population of more than half the countries on this planet.
yeah, certainly. So obviously the demand or the supply of an educated populace is there, but why is the demand from India's own local economy not there in terms of the economy not growing? Because obviously the things I see is I don't know, it maybe not be the best representation, but I go over to my mom's house and she's got the Indian equivalent of Dragon's Den, which is where the startups pitch ideas for investment, and it seems to be thriving. And India's got such a massive market; you can become a billionaire just by servicing the Indian market. You don't need to go abroad or to have a multinational company to have a multi-billion pound rupee business. Not to the word, I know it's lax and whatever it may be. But why is the Indian economy not growing at the rate that you would expect it to?
I think, again, like, uh, perhaps a more seasoned economist would be able to answer this question better. Uh, but think of it in some ways, like India and China are two basically very, very large economies, right? Both in terms of like their population size, and by population size, the size of their economy. But China was able to grow at a much rapid pace since late 1980s compared to India. China in some ways have leapfrogged. Now, there are many arguments why China was able to do so and India wasn't able to do so. Some would make political arguments, them like India being sort of a democracy, even if a messy one. There are all kinds of accommodations of interest that has to be made. India missed the bus on the manufacturing sector, which can absorb large number of unskilled workforce. When we think of the 63 million graduates, the IITs and the Delhi universities and the JNUs and the Calcutta University would not even account for like 5 million of them, right? The 60 million of them are basically being produced in rural India. And so they don't have the kind of skill set which I think when the industry talks about that they are not employable, I think they are focusing on that large number which does not have perhaps the vocational skills which is needed for the industry. So there is a disconnect. Now, the disconnect is coming because of politics or because industry is also not investing. Is sort of like there are serious political economy reasons why we are where we are. But and like one has to be also not dismissive like of things like of our politicians or of our industry. Uh, this is not a problem for which we can sort of like read a manual and work according to it, right? These are unique challenges that countries face, and so like we are moving the way we could, but I think things look very, very difficult.
Yeah, I think there's lots of potential or huge amounts of potential within India. I think infrastructure used to be one of the big ones that the global companies used to kind of complain about India and maybe political instability. But I think for the last couple of governments, they have kind of survived for, I know the BJP party has been in power for what, decade, just over a decade now. So there is a consistent, I think India has grown economically for there. I think number 4 in the world at the moment in terms of economy size. I think energy is going to be plays a big problem. I think the narrative is that they lack on natural resources. Is it actually the case? Because it's a huge landmass. Is it just not been explored, or is it there is just generally not the same level of natural resources available that would be required to support that economy?
I'm not an economist, so I would like largely stay from commenting on this area. But yeah, it's true. Like we have large land mass, we have a huge labor force. If you want to think in that terms, there are natural resources, but then there are challenges. Like we had a very poor infrastructure, say till like early 2000s. Things have started changing in last 20-25 years, but the pace of that change is very, very slow. per capita, like I think our investment in education has been very low. Our education in healthcare has been very, very low. So challenges are multiple fold, and it's like which, and these challenges are faced by many developing economies of this sort of like size. Like when you have finite resources, where do you put them? Right?
Mm.
If you divert in one area, the other suffers. And this has been a challenge for India since independence. Like if you just read through our 5 year plans of like the first 3 5 year plans, uh, like you could blame anyone you want, but then they were trying to do best with what limited things they had. And when they diverted in industry, then the agriculture started suffering because they were putting money in agriculture and industry. Primary education did not receive the kind of traction it should have received. So
Okay, understood. So I'm conscious of your time, so we're going to wrap up very shortly. But just looking ahead, what do you see the future for India over the next 5 to 10 years? I know you said you're not an economist, etc., but just with your political science hat on,
but future in what ways?
um, are we looking? Is India looking to grow? Are we going to grow
Sure.
in
Okay.
terms of from an
Okay. So
economic perspective, or even from a
let's
geopolitical perspective?
let's see it in all three, four dimensions. I think the first, I think India continues to remain politically stable, right? You saw these youth movement and protest happening in many parts of the world, from Mexico to I think in Africa, African continent. We saw at least four cases in South Asia. Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Myanmar. All basically saw regime change, as some actually saw a brutal regime change. In some ways, one has to give credit to Indian democracy. Despite its all messiness, it is able to absorb some of those sentiments. So there is institutional resilience, there is political sort of like resilience, and that is really, really important. Like political resilience and order is really, really important for economic growth. So I think on that front, we are doing okay. On the economic front, I think we are seeing seesaw, right? We already discussed the challenges of having a large workforce which is not employed or even are in jobs which is like that they're not very happy about. Uh, but if you are thinking from the investors' point of view, I think India, because it remains politically stable and despite all kinds of sort of like issues, the growth has been modest even in these sort of like years. Like despite facing all kinds of geopolitical headwinds, India is still able to sort of like grow at a much faster pace than we had imagined. Even I think the June quarter results which just came out, June quarter results basically suggest like most companies did better or posted better results than expected. Of course, there is a decline. The Iran-Israel-US conflict and the energy crisis that it has shown, there is decline in the performance, but they have done much better than what was expected. And with now there are but everyone rushed to the AI sort of like boom for last 1.5 years. That is likely to stagnate, and then I think we'll see return of some of these investors back to India. I think broadly the fundamentals remain strong, so we might not see returns of like short-term investors. But those who are thinking about like 5 to 10 year kind of a return, I think India remains fundamentally strong on that. Geopolitically, yeah, like we are in a tough situation, but who's not? Right? But in some ways, like being able to sort of like navigate the complex scenario that is emerging without getting drawn into the conflict, I think we have done fairly okay. Could we have done better? Of course. But then, given the situation, I think we are fine. Uh, in a nutshell, I'm not being gung ho on India story, but I remain fairly optimistic about our situation. And the reason I'm optimistic is because I always think about where we are coming from, right? Where we were in 1947, where we were in 1977, and where we were in 2007. So, given those things, I think we are doing fine.
It's a positive trend. Okay, well, very conscious of your time, Rahul. But I think I could speak to you for lots of hours on all sorts of topics. But if our audience wanted to learn a little bit about you and your work, where's the best place to follow you?
So I do post when I write something on X or Twitter. That's the only social media platform I use. I'm very inactive on that. Not inactive, but I just very occasionally post things on that when I write. But the other one is Center for Policy Research. Basically, they send out monthly newsletter of all the work that folks at the center do. Of course, like those who know about Center for Policy Research, in the last 3 years, we are in a very different world. But yeah, so X and the CPR newsletter.
Awesome. Well, we'll link to all those in the episode descriptions. And I think you might be my resident India expert for future podcasts as well.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I hope this conversation was useful.
No, it certainly was, especially for me. So, Rahul Verma, thank you very much for appearing on the DME podcast.
Thank you so much.